The star cruiser Gluxon IV, flagship of the Galactic Interstellar Coalition, was a marvel of engineering and a testament to the unity of hundreds of species. A glittering behemoth of silver alloys and pulsating lights, it housed a crew of thousands, with representatives from nearly every sentient life form that had so far achieved the gift or curse of spacefaring civilization. Captain Belkorr, a 2-ton creature with 6 limber limbs and a head resembling an armored clam, stared in mild amusement at the ship's newest guest. "So," he rasped, his voice echoing through the resonating chambers lining his exoskeletal neck, "you consume a liquid poison as a recreational pastime." Standing in front of the captain and a panel of curious coalition representatives was their latest envoy from Earth, Commander Dave Hendricks. Average height, unassuming build, with sandy blonde hair and a devil-may-care grin that seemed permanently etched on his face, Dave had already given them plenty of surprises. But today promised to outshine them all. "It's not poison," Dave said, chuckling. "It's alcohol. Specifically, this fine specimen is whiskey, 80 proof. Aged 12 years, he held up the amber liquid with a reverence that seemed, to the aliens, both alarming and ridiculous. The assembled creatures exchanged glances, some blinking multiple eyes, others twitching tendrils. Belkorr's secondary mandibles clacked with skeptical amusement. "To clarify, human Hendricks, this whiskey induces voluntary incapacitation by impairing neural function and coordination." Dave nodded, grinning wider. "That's one way to put it." A squat, gelatinous being named Quelm undulated nervously beside him. Quelm had the texture of unset gelatin and a severe fear of almost everything, especially concepts that defied logic. "Why would you willingly impair yourselves?" The quivering mass asked, each word punctuated by a rippling wobble. "This seems counterproductive." "It's fun," Dave said simply. "Relaxes the nerves, lowers inhibitions, and when consumed responsibly, makes for some great stories." Captain Belkorr waved an appendage dismissively. "Absurd," he said. "Among the Glekian warrior caste, toxins are only used to incapacitate enemies, not allies. This human ritual is comical at best." Dave shrugged. "Mock it all you want. Until you've tried it, you can't really understand." News of Dave's drinking demonstration spread quickly across the Gluxon IV. Representatives of all shapes and sizes crowded the observation lounge, where a sturdy table was set with glasses, bottles of various human spirits, and a small informational display. The coalition prided itself on cultural exchange, and no one wanted to miss the moment when the Earthling proved or disproved the absurd claim of recreational intoxication. "Place your bets," everyone croaked Rulok, a scaly reptilian with a penchant for gambling. "I wager 20 ration credits that the human drops unconscious after 3 shots of this whiskey." Dave, now clad in his civilian garb, a snug, dark shirt and a leather jacket that looked too warm for the climate-controlled ship, popped the cap off the bottle of whiskey with a practiced flick of his thumb. "I'd take that bet if I were you," he said. "But you're gonna lose." Boastful sneered Belkorr from the head of the table, his thick appendages crossed in a way that resembled a pouting parent. "Very well. Proceed with your cultural display, human." Dave poured himself a generous serving of whiskey, savoring the earthy aroma. He lifted his glass, and the crowd leaned forward, many of them creating odd clicking, buzzing, or humming sounds that passed for nervous anticipation. "To galactic unity and interspecies understanding," he said, then downed the shot in one smooth motion. The liquid burned delightfully, but he maintained a perfectly neutral expression. Quelm quivered beside him. He doesn't appear incapacitated," it mumbled in dismay. "How?" Dave grinned. "Takes more than that, my friend." He poured another. This time, Belkorr's primary eyes widened, while several smaller sub-eyes rotated, watching from various angles. Again the captain asked incredulously. Again Dave confirmed and drank. To the bewilderment of everyone, nothing changed. No slurred words, no stumbling, no immediate loss of consciousness. The aliens buzzed with confusion, hypothesizing everything from latent superpowers to outright fraud. Dave, meanwhile, began teaching them a human drinking game called Never Have I Ever, sparking even more bafflement as the rules made less sense the more they drank. Somewhere in the chaos, Rulok made a decision. "We will try this alcohol," he announced, his scales glistening with intrigue. Several others, emboldened by Rulok's bravery, volunteered to join the experiment. Belkorr waved the group forward with an impatient gesture. "Fine, but proceed with caution. We know nothing of its effects on non-human physiology." "Oh, you're in for a treat," Dave said cheerfully, pouring small measures for each volunteer. He handed Rulok a glass first. Rulok sniffed it skeptically, his forked tongue flickering. "I will demonstrate the resilience of my species," he said, downing the drink in one gulp. Almost immediately, his scales began to shimmer and change color, cycling through neon hues. "Interesting," he said, voice thick and slow. "I feel powerful." The feeling didn't last. Moments later, Rulok toppled sideways, scales turning an alarming shade of turquoise. Belkorr barked orders for medical intervention, but Rulok's only concern, spoken with labored solemnity, was how cozy the floor had become. The room erupted into chaos, the kind only alcohol-induced camaraderie can create. The various species who chose to imbibe learned, one by one, that alcohol had different effects on them, none of which were predictable. Qualm, who had somehow worked up the courage to sip from a glass, discovered that alcohol transformed it into a puddle of sentient goo, incapable of reforming for 2 hours. A 4-armed insectoid named Talrix developed an obsession with human music, which led to it attempting and failing a complex dance called the worm. By the 4th round, only Belkorr and a handful of other observers remained standing, stone-cold sober but highly bewildered. Dave was still pouring drinks and appeared disturbingly unaffected. "You're all lightweights," he teased, grinning broadly. His good humor and startling tolerance had made him both a legend and a menace. Belkorr's appendages clacked in consternation. "How? How can you endure so much? Your species is biologically fragile compared to others. This intoxication should have rendered you immobile, at best." Dave leaned back, casually swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Human livers are tough. Plus, practice makes perfect. Want to give it a shot." The captain of the mighty Gluxon IV paused, weighing the dignity of his position against the challenge presented by the cocky earthling. A gleam of something bordering on reckless pride entered his main ocular lenses. "Very well," Belkorr declared. "For science." The other observers gasped. Belkorr accepted the offered glass, hesitated for only a moment, and drank. It was a mistake. Belkorr's 6 limbs, which normally moved with the precision of a battle droid, suddenly seemed to have minds of their own. He slumped over the table, struggling to form coherent words. "Th-th ... this ship is spinning." He managed, before collapsing in a heap of tangled limbs and sputtered dignity. Dave leaned over and patted him on what might have been his shoulder. "Happens to the best of us, Captain." The laughter and chaos stretched on for hours. One by one, the brave or foolish aliens succumbed to the intoxicating effects of human alcohol. The initial mockery had given way to awe, then foolish bravado, and finally to widespread incapacitation. The next morning, those who could manage consciousness limped, oozed, or floated back to their stations. Belkorr convened an emergency meeting to address what was quickly becoming known as the incident. He stood unsteadily, still visibly affected, and pointed a trembling appendage at Dave. "Human Hendricks," he said, voice rough but steadying. "We grossly underestimated your species' capacity for self-imposed poisoning. I demand answers." Dave grinned, sipping a glass of water. "Told you it was fun." This was only the beginning. For the next phase, the coalition would conduct formal studies to understand, and perhaps control, the human phenomenon of recreational drinking. But that would have to wait once the aliens could stand upright again. In the hours following what would later be documented as the Great Whiskey Incident, much of the Gluxon IV had fallen into a strange, sluggish stupor. Infirmary units were operating at maximum capacity, attending to hungover aliens whose systems had never encountered anything like human alcohol. Quelm, still puddled but regaining viscosity, whimpered on a heated medical platform while Talrix muttered about learning breakdancing from ancient Earth archives. Dave Hendricks, by contrast, appeared remarkably well rested as he strolled through the corridors. He waved at the passing coalition members, many of whom glared at him with newfound wariness. If humans could render some of the galaxy's most formidable beings incapacitated by leisure drinking, what other absurd tricks might they have up their sleeves? The tension reached its peak when a delegation of senior coalition officials summoned Dave to a formal inquiry. In the Grand Chamber, an expansive hall decorated with holographic star maps and shimmering glyphs of countless cultures, representatives of various species convened. Belkorr presided, still a bit shaky, with dark circles beneath his main oculars. Commander Hendricks, Belkorr announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. This assembly seeks to understand your species' peculiar relationship with this. Alcohol, he hesitated, as if even the word tasted strange. We were unprepared for its effects. Some among us believe it to be a weapon disguised as recreation. The chamber buzzed with murmurs and clicks of agreement. Dave stepped forward, his casual stride and irrepressible grin at odds with the room's grave demeanor. Captain Belkorr, esteemed representatives, he said, bowing slightly, I assure you that alcohol is not a weapon. It's just a thing we humans enjoy in social settings. Look, I'll admit things got a bit out of hand, but it was all in good fun, right? Several representatives, still nursing pounding headaches and other unfamiliar sensations, did not seem amused. One of them, a crystalline entity named Viralis, who had temporarily lost structural cohesion and reformed into a jagged, barely coherent shape, let out a scraping noise. Fun, it grated. I lost cohesion for 12 hours. Dave nodded sympathetically. Yeah, sorry about that. I did warn everyone to take it slow. The room fell silent, heavy with the realization that technically he had, but the mystery of human alcohol remained. Why did it affect species so differently? Could its effects be controlled, or worse, weaponized? Unwilling to risk another incident, the coalition devised an ambitious plan. You will assist us in controlled studies of this alcohol, Belkorr declared, his voice brokering no argument. We must understand its properties, its potential hazards, and ideally develop strategies for mitigation. Dave's grin widened. Does that mean more taste tests? Belkorr groaned. The next weeks were a chaotic blur of experiments, anecdotes, and interspecies exchanges as Dave became the de facto guide through humanity's strange ritual of drinking. An entire wing of the ship was converted into a controlled research environment, though in practice it resembled a bar with high-tech scanning equipment. The Coalition's finest scientists, including Grolna, a squid-like chemist with a penchant for overanalyzing, monitored every interaction, every sip, and every wild effect. This is madness, Grolna declared during one session. You humans willingly consume this to alter brain chemistry and coordination. It's impractical. Not all humans drink, Dave explained, tossing back a shot of rum. Some people don't like it, and that's cool. But for a lot of us, it's a cultural thing. Parties, celebrations, bonding. Sure, sometimes it goes too far, but that's part of learning limits. A lean, feline species named Jurl sat beside him, ears twitching nervously. Jurl had opted for a cocktail designed to have minimal effects but was already regretting it. Learning limits, Jurl muttered, eyes widening as its vision blurred. I don't see any educational value in this. Dave laughed. That, my friend, is the limit you're finding out about. Predictably, the experiments spiraled out of control. Each species handled alcohol differently, with wildly unpredictable results. During one session, a gaseous life form named Swire floated up to the ceiling, laughing uncontrollably and emitting a glowing, sweet-smelling vapor that made others mildly euphoric. Coalition regulations were hastily rewritten to prohibit such secondary intoxication phenomena. In another incident, a stout, armored creature named Plix discovered that alcohol caused its carapace to vibrate at resonant frequencies. The resulting noise was akin to a subsonic opera mixed with the rumble of tectonic plates. Dave, ever the opportunist, formed an impromptu band called the Vibra-Plix Experience. It was terrible, but memorable. As the days wore on, the Coalition's scientific purpose became increasingly muddled. Representatives who initially approached with skepticism soon found themselves caught up in human drinking games, including a rowdy interspecies version of beer pong. That nearly sparked a diplomatic crisis when Rulok, still determined to redeem his dignity, hurled a ball so hard it embedded itself in a wall panel. Belkorr was furious. Hendricks, this was supposed to be a controlled environment. It was Dave protested, balancing a drink on his forehead as he attempted a human party trick called stork standing, but then it got fun. And that, Belkorr said, exasperation clear, is precisely the problem. Things came to a head during a high-stakes experiment involving something Dave called the Gauntlet, a lineup of progressively stronger drinks from Earth cultures. The Coalition's bravest or most reckless volunteers signed up, determined to prove themselves. By the end, nearly all participants were slumped over, each grappling with different effects, from uncontrollable laughter to sudden naps. Belkorr watched, stone-faced. I have witnessed many battles. None have been as baffling as this. Dave, still standing, raised his glass. To resilience. To absurdity, Belkorr muttered. Yet a strange thing happened in the aftermath. Those who endured the gauntlet bonded over their shared misery and triumph. Quelm, who had successfully avoided turning into a puddle this time, shared jokes with Talrix. Even Veralis, whose crystalline body was still realigning, acknowledged newfound respect for the challenge they had faced. Belkorr, despite himself, reflected on the peculiar camaraderie that had formed. Perhaps he mused aloud, there is more to this human ritual than mere intoxication, unity forged through collective suffering. Pretty much, Dave said, clapping him on the back, which was a mistake. Belkorr's unsteady legs gave out, and he crumpled to the floor with a groan. I hate humans, he whispered. Love you too, buddy. Eventually, the Coalition compiled a comprehensive report on alcohol's properties, effects, and potential benefits for controlled socialization. Strict regulations were passed, and only certain species were permitted to consume under monitored circumstances. Despite the headaches, the lessons learned were valuable. As for Dave Hendricks, he became a legend, a symbol of humanity's inexplicable resilience, their penchant for chaos, and their remarkable ability to bring beings together, even when incapacitation was a risk. Rumors of his drinking prowess spread across the galaxy, earning him nicknames like the indomitable imbiber and spiritsmith. One evening, as he walked through the quiet corridors of the ship, he bumped into Belkorr again. The captain, now wary of any social gathering involving alcohol, regarded him with a mix of apprehension and reluctant respect. Hendricks, Belkorr said, what is it with you humans? Why do you do this? Dave thought for a moment, his smile softer. It's not about the alcohol, Captain. It's about the moments, the laughs, the bonds. The bonds. The stories. Yeah, we screw up sometimes. But we don't just drink to forget, we drink to remember. Belkorr studied him carefully, then nodded. Next time, if there must be one, I will bring the antidotes. Deal, Dave said, offering a handshake. Just remember, take it slow. Belkorr hesitated, then shook his hand. I'll try. That's the spirit. Belkorr groaned again. Stop, with the jokes. As Dave walked away, the captain rubbed his main eyes and muttered to himself, I will never understand humans. But deep down, perhaps, he already did just a little. Word of humanity's peculiar alcohol rituals spread throughout the galaxy, turning Gluxon IV into a bizarre mecca of cultural exchange and very questionable decisions. For weeks, representatives from distant systems poured in, some curious about the effects of Earth spirits, others determined to prove their species' superiority. Despite strict regulations imposed by Captain Belkorr, the sessions had taken on a life of their own. The Coalition's Science Council authorized the experiments only under close supervision. Each participant signed a waiver outlining possible side effects: spontaneous dancing, existential crises, and in one extreme case involving a three-headed being called Joro, uncontrollable recitation of ancient poetry in dead languages. In return, they were granted access to the Human Spirits Laboratory, where Dave Hendricks and a rotating crew of brave or foolhardy aliens attempted to make sense of the madness. One day, an unexpected visitor arrived: General Vrekon, a towering, armored warlord from the Horgor Dominion. The Horgors were renowned for their physical strength, stoic temperament, and an unyielding disdain for perceived weaknesses. Their motto, strength above all, was emblazoned on their war banners and battle hymns. General Vraken's entrance into the lab was like an eclipse of reason. "I have come to demonstrate the Horgur's unmatched fortitude," Vrekon announced, his voice a deep rumble that reverberated through the walls. "Humans boast of this alcohol's power. I will show that it is nothing to the might of the Horgur." Captain Belkorr, who had developed a reflexive twitch whenever these experiments were mentioned, shook his head. "General, I strongly advise against this. We have not fully mapped the effects on your kind." Vrekon's eyes narrowed, his expression suggesting that advice was merely a polite word for nonsense. "Begin," he commanded. Dave, ever the obliging host and semi-reformed troublemaker, stepped forward with a grin. "Welcome, General. Let's start you off easy. This is beer, a classic, low-alcohol beverage. Humans use it to relax, have fun at sporting events, and will make questionable choices." Vrekon's massive hand engulfed the glass, and he drank deeply. He paused, considering the taste, then laughed a thunderous bellow that shook the bottles on nearby shelves. "Weak," he declared, setting the empty glass down with a clink. "Well then," Dave said, raising an eyebrow, "how about something with a little more kick?" He poured a dark liquid into a small glass. "This is tequila. Popular in Earth's warmer regions, often served with salt and lime, though I've simplified it for your needs." Vrekon tossed back the drink. His armor-clad shoulders shuddered slightly. A mild sting, but nothing more. It took exactly 6 minutes. In front of a stunned audience, Vrekon's mighty frame began to sway. His eyes crossed, and he raised a finger as if to make an important declaration. "Strength," he slurred. "Above. Something." Then he crumpled into a metal heap, snoring loudly. The Horgur incident became the stuff of legend almost overnight, triggering a galaxy-wide debate. Was it a fluke? Anomalous biochemistry? Or had humanity truly concocted an ultimate equalizer that could humble even the strongest warriors? Ambassadors from various species demanded a chance to test themselves. Belkorr, against his better judgment, relented provided that extensive safety protocols were followed. The following weeks were chaotic, to say the least. Taurix, the four-armed insectoid with a penchant for human music, now ran an intergalactic spirits appreciation society out of the lab. The society's meetings, attended by curious and competitive aliens, typically devolved into impromptu karaoke sessions and debates about the merits of whiskey versus vodka. At one particularly memorable gathering, Swire, the gaseous lifeform, claimed it could consume alcohol by diffusion alone. The resulting vapor cloud left half the room giggling uncontrollably. As Dave watched, sipping his own drink, he couldn't help but marvel at the absurdity. Here, among species that had once eyed each other with suspicion, alliances were forming not over treaties or military might, but over shared hangovers, bad dancing, and relentless laughter. Yet, amidst the camaraderie, a new wave of overconfidence was brewing. It started with a small group of competitive aliens led by Zorkra, a sentient plant species with an unusually high tolerance for toxins. Zorkra's leafy appendages waved excitedly. "We have adapted to consume the deadliest substances known to our kind," it boasted. "This human alcohol will be no different." The society, now accustomed to reckless displays, cheered. Zorkra motioned for the strongest drink available. Dave hesitated. "I really don't think this is a good idea." Zorkra scoffed, rustling its leaves dismissively. "Your concern is noted, human." With a resigned sigh, Dave retrieved a bottle he had been saving for a particularly brave or suicidal moment, a bottle of absinthe. The neon green liquid had been the subject of both admiration and fear among Earth's drinkers for centuries. "This," he said, "is absinthe, traditionally distilled with wormwood. It's strong." Zorkra's leaves quivered with anticipation as it absorbed the liquid through its roots. For several moments, nothing happened. Then, in a sudden burst of luminescence, Zorkra began to glow, each leaf shimmering like a bioluminescent beacon. It started to sway and hum a low, melodious tune that, while beautiful, grew increasingly frenetic. "Fascinating," Grolna, the squid chemist, muttered, taking notes. it appears to be experiencing an ethereal state of euphoria. Zorkra's humming turned into shrieking as its leaves burst into spontaneous twirls, scattering luminescent pollen everywhere. The pollen, it turned out, was mildly hallucinogenic to non-plant species. Within minutes, the lab descended into chaos as attendees experienced visions of flying sandwiches, existential debates with invisible deities, and the uncontrollable urge to tap dance. Belkorr, who had been monitoring remotely, issued a frantic order lockdown. Once order was restored and Zorkra had ceased glowing and apologizing profusely, the Coalition instituted even stricter regulations. Only those who passed rigorous medical screenings and psychological evaluations could participate in future experiments. Dave became something of a reluctant folk hero, equal parts admired and blamed for the madness. One evening, as Dave sat nursing a glass of wine, a modest vintage compared to previous endeavors, he was joined by Quelm, who had finally mastered the art of staying solid while under the influence. "You know," Quelm began, its gelatinous form settling into a chair, "for all the insanity, there is something profoundly unifying about this." Dave nodded. "It's weird, right? We bond over the strangest things. Conflict, laughter, hangovers." Indeed, Quelm quivered slightly. "It is a curious paradox. Unity through disorientation." They sat in companionable silence for a while. Then Dave lifted his glass. "To unexpected friendships." Quelm raised a pseudopod in response. "To surviving the experience." Their toast was interrupted by an announcement over the intercom. "All hands, please report to Observation Lounge for a demonstration of the Horgor hangover cure. Attendance is mandatory." Dave winced. This should be good. The Horgor cure, it turned out, involved a ceremonial purging ritual that combined intense heat, pungent roots, and vigorous chanting. Many participants, unable to stomach the ordeal, declared they would rather endure the hangover. As for Dave, he was banned from offering his own cures, which consisted of greasy earth food and a regrettable hair of the dog concoction. Still, despite or because of the chaos, the Coalition found itself stronger. Species that had once viewed each other as rivals now shared stories of intoxication and camaraderie. The Gluxon IV had become a symbol of resilience and humor amidst the galaxy's challenges. One day, as the crew prepared for a new batch of volunteers, Belkorr pulled Dave aside. "Hendricks," he said, with a tired but genuine smile, "you've introduced chaos, but you've also introduced something irreplaceable." "Chaos," Dave quipped. "It's just another word for fun." Belkorr's secondary eyes rolled. "Let's agree to disagree." "Fair enough." As Dave walked away, preparing for yet another round of unpredictable research, he couldn't help but reflect on how far things had come. Humanity, for all its flaws, had shown that even the strangest customs could bring the galaxy together or knock it flat on its back. Either way, he'd keep pouring. The future was uncertain. But for the first time in a long while, the galaxy seemed ready to face it, preferably with a drink in hand and a friend to lean on when it got weird.